Welcome to Lesson 16 in this series covering American government and politics. In this lesson, we consider the powers of the president in foreign policy. By the end of the lesson, you should be able to answer the following questions. How powerful is the president in foreign affairs? What role does Congress have in foreign policy? The president is expected to set national foreign and defense policy strategy. Many presidents will establish a strategy to guide foreign policy decisions. There is a long tradition of presidents establishing doctrines dating back to the Monroe Doctrine of 1823. The Monroe Doctrine established the principle that the United States would oppose any interference by foreign powers in the political affairs of any North or South American country. The Trump administration referred to the Monroe Doctrine on a number of occasions. Other presidential foreign policy strategies are less long-standing, but can still be influential. For example, the 2002 Bush Doctrine promoted the preemptive use of force and explains U.S. intervention in Iraq in 2003. However, the pace and unpredictability of international events can conspire to undermine a president's strategy. For example, President Obama signaled during his 2008 election campaign that he hoped to rely on diplomatic rather than military power. However, in power, he oversaw the surge strategy in Afghanistan and significantly increased use of drone attacks. The dispersed leadership of Congress makes it harder for it to develop a competing national strategy. Even under strong leadership, Congress tends to leave the job of writing foreign policy doctrine to presidents. However, presidential doctrines and strategies often require public and congressional support to implement, particularly if there are cost implications. For example, implementing the Bush Doctrine in Iraq required an initially high presidential approval rating, congressional authorization, and appropriations. The president leads on major diplomatic initiatives and agreements. He is often unofficially called the diplomat-in-chief. For example, President Trump led on a temporary thaw in relations with DPR Korea, and he personally attended the Singapore summit in 2018. The president can also withdraw U.S. membership of intergovernmental organizations with little constraint. For example, Trump withdrew from the World Health Organization in 2020. The president has the constitutional power to appoint ambassadors and sign treaties. Remember that the appointment of ambassadors requires Senate confirmation, and all treaties must be ratified with a 2/3 majority in the Senate. This power extends to making executive agreements, which sometimes require congressional approval, but only by simple majority. For example, President Trump signed an executive agreement to join the USMCA trade agreement in 2019. The president's role as chief diplomat also provides the power to recognize foreign governments. For example, President Obama recognized South Sudan in 2011. It is rare for members of Congress to act diplomatically in isolation. An isolated example is Speaker Pelosi's visit to Taiwan in 2022. The visit was discouraged by President Biden and led to an escalation in U.S.-China relations. However, similar congressional initiatives are rarely so influential. Senate ratification is required by Constitution for all treaties with a 2/3 majority. The Senate refused to ratify the UN Disabilities Rights Convention in 2012. The Senate also confirms all appointments of ambassadors. However, most diplomatic agreements take the form of executive agreements. Most important executive agreements require congressional approval, but unlike treaty ratifications only by a simple majority. For example, in 2019, the USMCA trade agreement was approved by Congress as an executive agreement. The president is expected to take the lead during national crises. Crises offer presidents opportunity to appear presidential and as the nation's leader. Presidential approval ratings rise significantly immediately following a crisis or military action. This is a phenomenon called the rally round the flag effect. For example, George W. Bush's approval ratings rose from 51% to 90% after the 9/11 attacks. The president may also initiate military action by deploying troops using his constitutional power as commander-in-chief. Presidents have done this on many occasions, and normally without a formal declaration of war. While declarations of war are now very rare, the War Powers Resolution of 1973 requires congressional approval of military action within 60 days. However, the president tends to sidestep Congress if approval seems unlikely. For example, President Biden ordered airstrikes against Houthi targets in Yemen in 2024 without congressional approval. Congress has little influence during the opening stages of a crisis. The public expects support for the president as national leader and for Congress to support the troops. However, Congress has the constitutional power to declare war and to approve military action longer than 60 days through the War Powers Resolution. However, Congress has never rejected approval under the War Powers Resolution while military action is underway. Presidents have rejected any congressional constraints on their powers as Commander-in-Chief, including through the War Powers Resolution. In 2019, Congress passed a bill ordering the withdrawal of troops from Yemen unless congressional approval was provided. The bill was vetoed by President Trump and so had no effect. The power of the purse refers to the power of Congress over the budget process. Like all areas of policy, the president requires funding to conduct foreign policy, including funding foreign military interventions. The power of the purse can be effective at limiting the president's foreign policy efforts. Congress can restrict funding for agencies and programs required to implement his foreign policy ideas. For example, the war in Vietnam was ended in 1975 after Congress stopped funding. A more modern example occurred in 2024 when Congress did not grant President Biden his full request for funding the war in Ukraine. Congress can also pass laws restricting expenditure in specific areas. For example, the Helms Amendment in 1973 prohibits any spending of international aid that might encourage abortions. Congress can also attempt to limit the president's powers as commander-in-chief by cutting spending on military operations. For example, in 1994, a bill cut all funds for military action in Somalia, although troops had already been withdrawn. However, public expectations generally mean the power of the purse is constrained once the president deploys troops. Unless public opinion is significantly against war, such as in Somalia after the Battle of Mogadishu, Congress must appear to support the troops. Contingency funds also give the president some ability to fund military action without specific appropriations. The Overseas Contingency Operations Fund provides the Department of Defense with more than $8 billion in discretionary funds for unforeseen international and military crises. Finally, all of Congress's oversight powers apply to foreign policy. The president can technically be impeached for foreign policy scandals, and standing and select committees can hold investigations into foreign policy issues. For example, In 2015, Congress established a select committee investigation into attacks on the U.S. compound in Benghazi in Libya. The investigation was embarrassing for President Obama and Secretary of State Clinton. However, although congressional oversight can cause public relations problems for the president, their ability to change policy direction is sometimes limited. For example, committee hearings in 2007 regarding the Iraq War failed to significantly alter Bush administration policy concerning the war. In summary, the president is able to dominate American foreign policy to an extent he is unable to match in domestic policy. His powers include the ability to set national strategy, crisis leadership and military action as commander-in-chief, and signing treaties and executive agreements. However, Congress can limit each of these powers, including through the power of the purse, denying authorization of military force, and rejecting ratification of treaties. However, Congress is more limited in its ability to constrain the president in the foreign policy sphere compared to other areas of policy.